not your average typical consulting firm and carries the title Chief Potential Officer. You started this company, or you're co-founder of the company, and goes back to about 2003. It's a long time ago now. How has the journey been, and what have you managed to achieve? One of the things you would focus on, and that I like to focus on, are the values of the organization. Because it's easy to make money in business, but it is more difficult to do it with your values intact. Would you agree with that?
And in my opinion, that the moment you start chasing the short term, how much profit can we make this year or even this?
Hello, this is Amer Qureshi. Welcome to The Boss from Down Under. I'm here in Canberra, Australia these days, and I'm going to be talking to a variety of people in the second season of The Boss. Today, my guest is Anthony Mitchell. He's the Chief Potential Officer, CPO, of a company called Bendelta in Australia. So I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about Bendelta and about Anthony Mitchell before we start the conversation. So let's start with Bendelta. They're not your average typical consulting firm. Founded in Australia back in 2003, Bendelta helps organizations unleash human potential, not just by crunching data or reorganizing or optimizing org structures or org charts, but by really understanding how people, teams, and culture thrive. This approach blends strategy, organizational design, and leadership development, culture change, and human experience, designed to help individuals and teams perform at their best and adapt in an increasingly complex world. One ambition that they've publicly shared is their 1 million, 1 billion vision. Sounds very inspiring, doesn't it? 1 million, 1 billion. But what does it actually mean? They're aiming to directly enable 1 million people to achieve their potential. That's right, 1 million people. And then indirectly impact 1 billion lives through the ripple effect. A very ambitious and worthwhile vision indeed. They have been recognized in industry awards, including HRD 5-Star Employer of Choice, highlighting their commitment not just to clients, but to their own people as well. In recent years, Bendelta has grown both depth and reach, from digital offerings like AI-enabled leadership support to acquisitions that expand their global coaching footprint. I'm really excited to be talking to Anthony Mitchell. But before we do, let's have a quick look at Anthony and his achievements. Before Bendelta, Anthony spent over a decade in senior consulting roles with the Sheffield Group and has worked with organizations across Australia, Asia Pacific, and beyond on strategy and transformation. He's a recognized thought leader on leadership, organizational design, culture, and strategic thinking, with a background in both mathematics and psychology. Anthony also engages in the broader social sector, including leadership roles with Aurora Education Foundation and involvement with Amnesty International Australia, showing his commitment to positive impact beyond corporate consulting. So let's go and have a chat with Anthony Mitchell, the Chief Potential Officer of Bendelta. Okay, joining me on the Boss podcast from Down Under is Anthony Mitchell from Bendelta. Now, I've told you about Anthony already and his background and about the company and what they do. Anthony, welcome to the Boss podcast. It's really good to reconnect with you once again.
Yeah, no, it's lovely to reconnect, and thank you very much for having me as a guest on this.
And so I was looking at your company's background and everything, and I know the company goes back many, many years ago. You started this company, or you're co-founder of the company, and goes back to about 2003. It's a long time ago now. How has the journey been, and what have you managed to achieve from very humble beginnings, as I know you started with?
Yeah, very, very humble indeed. Well, look, most of what's happened has been quite a surprise to me, if I'll be honest with you. It was very much just an adventure. Myself and my co-founder thought it would be great to see if we could create our own consultancy. I don't think we put any particular time period on it, but I think if you'd asked either of us, would we still be running it in 2026, we probably would have said no. And if you'd said, well, could you imagine it having over 100 people? I probably would have said, no, I can't imagine it having more than 10 people. So it has been quite a surprise in that regard. It was very much something we set upon as a philosophical adventure as much as anything else. What kind of organization would we like to create? And so, yes, it's been fascinating to see us go from an 11 square meter windowless serviced office for 3 months to the kind of setup that we have these days.
So, when you're growing a company, especially one which is very closely linked to your own personal vision and so on, is it difficult, or did you find it difficult to scale up the business and still keep your values and your vision and everything intact?
It's a really interesting question, and I suspect it's different for everyone. So I don't want to tell people what the right thing or wrong thing is to do. In our particular case, we didn't hire any staff for the first 2.5 years.
Okay.
Now, we did that so that we could focus on, I guess, first of all, just testing the hypothesis. Is this going to be an ongoing concern? Are we working out exactly what kind of organization we want this to be? And so where we needed extra resources, we just drew on associates. But we eventually got to a point where we thought, well, actually, we know we're not going to stop doing this. And in fact, if we don't actually take this seriously, then our clients won't take it seriously either. We need to have permanent staff. We need to have permanent premises, things of that sort. And so that we started to grow. And then really that growth has continued for the last 20 years. And I'd like to think that that culture, we've remained able to keep that intact. For example, I think the culture today is terrific. But I wouldn't say it's been a linear progression. There's probably times that I can think of over the 2 years where perhaps the culture wasn't quite as strong as we might have liked. But I think we recognized those things and then said, all right, what do we need to do? There have been things that have been real markers for us throughout. We've had something called the Bendelta Code, which sets out our 9 key principles for operating. And we always go back to those, and everyone in the organization understands that those are the DNA of who we are. And that we're not planning to change any of that.
So the challenge for firms like yours, and I remember starting my own firm many, many years ago as an accountant, the big fear is that, if you're preaching to everyone else, you need to have your own house in order. So as an accountant, you need to make sure you're successful. As a consultant and as an organization, you need to make sure that you practice some of what you preach. How difficult is it, and since you work with so many different companies and organizations, to bring about cultural change? This seems to be one of those things that academics write about, us professionals try to work on. But how do you find it in practice when you're advising clients to bring about a cultural change?
Yeah, I mean, starting with ourselves, you're absolutely right. You don't want to have it in the marketplace that you don't have a good culture when everything that you do is around positive culture and human potential and so on. It would be very embarrassing, I must say. The good news is we've won a lot of Best Employer awards over the years. And that's been great because that's helped with the exact opposite of that scenario. It's enabled us to have credibility with clients that, well, wow, if we win all of those awards for our culture, then probably we know how to do these things reasonably well. So much so that the AFR approached us to run their best places to work. So we no longer compete in that, so because it would be a conflict of interest.
Interesting.
But it feels like a very nice step up to be doing that. Now that said, doesn't mean that our culture is always perfect. There's always things to work on. And you see that that's the case. When we work with other organizations on culture, there's nothing new under the sun to some degree. Culture comes down to mindsets and behaviors, comes down to symbols, rituals, stories, all of those kind of anthropological markers. And to some degree, it comes down to your systems and processes as well. I'm very big on the things that really drive it for the long term. If you can create the right sorts of symbols, rituals, stories, etc., that really stand for the things you care about most, and you anchor them deeply so that they can't be easily knocked over. I think that's a very powerful way to both create and keep culture.
And you were talking about your own principles, and I suppose that's what underpins the culture that you're trying to build in your own organization. Or for other organizations, it is about values, I suppose. And one of the things you would focus on, and that I like to focus on, are the values of the organization. Because it's easy to make money in business, but it is more difficult to do it with your values intact. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And well, it's my personal belief that having those values intact helps you to also be commercially successful as well. Because in my opinion, long-term success, the kind of success that doesn't last for a year or even a decade, but endures and endures, are the organizations that show long-term orientation. And in my opinion, that the moment you start chasing the short term, how much profit can we make this year or even this quarter or this month, is ultimately going to get you in trouble. Yes. You will stop investing in the sorts of things that you should, and eventually that catches up with you. It's no different from raising a child, right? We all try to raise our children to take a long-term orientation. We know that if they just do the thing that makes them happy today, they'll end up very sad in the long term.
Yes.
But if you do things that are tough, but are right, the things that show character, then it might take a while for you to see the patterns, but eventually it produces the right results. So I've always been a big believer that long-term orientation is so important.
And over time, if you look at the sort of work that your company does, how has that evolved? I know, for example, you're now very much involved in business coaching and so on. How has the business evolved in the last 20 years or so? And what is it that you do now compared to let's say, how you started?
It's interesting. I go back to our very first offerings and what we put on the website in 2003, and they don't look that different.
Okay.
You can see work around leadership development, organizational design, strategic planning, culture change. So the names of the services hasn't changed at all. But my goodness, in other ways, they've changed immensely.
Yes.
The work that we do in leadership development is now far more focused on moving mindsets rather than just building skills. It's far deeper in terms of its impact. The extent to which, of course, we use technology has massively changed over that time. And of course, the context has changed. If you think about the work that we're doing today, it has to consider the impact of things such as AI, global, political instability,
yes,
makeup of the workforce, energy transition. There are so many different factors, and because of all of those factors, it makes the solutions different as well. So I find that really interesting. It's a bit like saying, has there always been transportation to get you from one place to another? Well, yes, there has, but there's a big difference between your feet and a horse and cart and a motor car and a jet, right? So I feel the same about our services.
Yes, I'm going to delve into AI in a minute, but I know since your company does a lot of work in the leadership space, I just want to bounce a couple of things off you and see what your thoughts are. So half of my professional life has been spent in Australia, the last so many years in Pakistan. And we do a lot of work on leadership development, but we used to find that most of the leadership theories that were being promoted, even in developing countries like Pakistan, in the Middle East, where I've done a lot of work, were all Western-based theories, right? Everyone was talking about Jack Welch, or more recently about Simon Sinek. And I felt that you can't sort of take the Western theories on leadership, motivation, and copy and paste them in an Eastern or an Asian context. And did quite a lot of work and found that, one of my theories is that Jack Welch would never have succeeded in Pakistan because it would have been such a shock, cultural shock to him to work in an environment which is more unpredictable, less certain, and so on. Do you think the Western theories around leadership and everything can easily be adapted to Asian economies or Middle Eastern economies?
Yeah, it's a really good point you make. Look, I think I'm going to say a little bit of yes and a little bit of no.
Okay.
I always remember, I originally come from New Zealand, which has always had employment legislation that's very employee focused.
Yes.
It really to protect the rights of the individual. And I was doing my postgraduate program at Cornell University in New York, and of course, 95% of the people there were from the US.
Yeah.
And we would talk about different things to do, and they would say, well, of course, I'd just fire those people and I'd do this and all of these things. I was like, you can't actually do that in New Zealand. And so it was just so funny, that they couldn't understand what I was talking about and I couldn't understand what they were talking about. And then I remember running a leadership program, to your point, that was piloted with an Australian and New Zealand audience before going right around Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And the pilot went really well, and so I didn't think there would be much change required. But of course, the moment you suddenly had people from Japan, the Philippines, India, Thailand, etc., all in the room, I very rapidly recognized that some things had to change. Not necessarily in terms of the theories, but certainly in terms of what the learning model looked like.
Yes.
And some of those things you have to be careful not to stereotype, but there are definitely some tendencies in different cultures that do shift things. And more recently, I've been doing some work with a global executive team, a very large global FMCG company, and they are US centered in terms of the headquarters, but there's also a very strong Japanese component. And a lot of the theory on top team effectiveness suggests that you need a lot of positive conflict. You want people really debating issues. And so that's been really interesting to look at with the Japanese members of the team who come from a culture where that kind of open disagreement, and certainly with your CEO, is not really something that's considered to be appropriate. But what's been great has been we've been learning from both sides. That the Japanese people have been interested in the American style, and the American people have been keen to learn from Japanese style as well. And where we've been landing is probably somewhere in the middle that appreciates both of those two perspectives. So look, I very much agree with you. I think you do have to bear context in mind very much. And I mean, the geographical one is just one example of context.
Yes.
There's many other contextual factors that can materially change. As I said, I don't know that it changes the underlying nature of, for example, what leadership is, but it certainly may impact the style, and it might impact the execution. To your point, Jack Welch just couldn't have taken some of the actions that he did, depending on the legislative environment of some jurisdictions. And so, you may well be right. He may not have succeeded if he was trying to do the same thing in India.
Yes, it creates an interesting conversation in training workshops. Would he have or should he have succeeded? And we were talking about AI earlier, and I'm keen to know how you expected to change the work that you currently do. And just broadly, since you work with so many organizations, how are you seeing organizations being impacted by AI?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, this is the most significant technological change of our lifetime. I've been around for long enough to remember the arrival of the internet. And when I look back on that, I think of it as being positively glacial. I remember it arriving in 1993, and it took a decade for Blockbuster to go broke. Yes. It would take not 10 years, it'd take 10 months now for an organization to go broke if it didn't move at all on AI while its competitors were all doing so. I mean, the speed at which it moved in 2025 was absolutely incredible. And it's been unlike other technology rollouts where, you have to take it out to the people and help them become familiar with it and so on. So many workers were already doing AI by themselves. The level of AI fluency that existed in the workforce was often much greater than existed in the organization. I think the weakness that I sometimes see in organizations is they're focusing very much on the technological readiness and not on the organizational readiness. And even people who are chief technology officers have very much agreed with me that it's the organizational readiness that's more important. Broadly speaking, most organizations can get their hands on the same AI kit. There are some variations, but it's an incredibly democratizing tool. But the thing is, AI goes so fast and is improving so quickly that there's no way we can keep up with it. So actually, the biggest consideration for an organization is how close to keeping up with it can we be? How fast we move? That's the limiting factor. It's not the technology. It's the ability of the organization to adapt at pace. And that's very much a matter of culture and in terms of frictionless processes in the organization. That is the really big factor. And so when I'm working with organizations at the moment, and I've recently launched a book, a Chief People Officer's playbook for AI transformation, is really to work on having a culture that is frictionless enough in terms of its ability to adapt to new changes, whether it's AI or anything else, that you can keep up with the speed at which it's moving.
I think you're quite right. I find that many organizations, even large ones where you would expect the top management or the board to know better, they're still focused on the technology part, and they've forgotten about the human part, which is what will embrace the technology, which will encourage people to take on this new technology. Unless you work on the mindset and that cultural shift and change, nothing is going to change. So that, I think that's very, very good. When I was looking through your company's background, and particularly on your website, you mentioned one of your visions is this 1 million and 1 billion. The numbers are quite dramatic, really. So can you talk a little bit about the 1 million, 1 billion goal that you've set, or the vision that you have? Because it seems very ambitious, and how close are you to achieving it?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. So when myself and my co-founder formed the organization, I was heavily involved in Amnesty International, and she was very much involved in World Vision. I think we knew that our future really lay more in running commercial organizations, even though we loved what those not-for-profits were doing. And so we wanted to make sure that our organization was imbued with similar sentiments in terms of improving the human condition, making the world a better place, helping the realization of human potential. And so that was the ethos that we came in with, and then we codified that into this vision of 1 million, 1 billion. So the idea was that over time, and it would take us many years, we would directly help 1 million people to achieve more of their positive potential. Primarily, that's through leadership development and coaching, but sometimes it can even be the way that we work with a client to build their capacity, and perhaps some of the key colleagues there that we're working with. And then the billion takes two different forms. The billion is this kind of the spillover effect that happens indirectly. So there's two ways that can happen indirectly. Firstly, it's what impact do the leaders that we help achieve more of their human potential help others to achieve more of their human potential. That could be their direct reports, or it could be the communities they serve. And the other indirect way that it can occur is through our other services. So the work we do in strategy, organizational design, culture change, etc. So rather than impacting an individual directly by building their skills or capacities, we're improving the overall organization to make it a more propitious environment for people to realize their human potential. So if you think about it, the 1 million comes from growing trees, growing plants, whereas the 1 billion comes from cultivating the garden to make it a more healthy environment for human potential to flourish. So that's what we've been pursuing. I think we're doing pretty well on the million. We've got a long way to go on the billion. And of course, and the reason for that is that historically, the majority of our work has been in Australia. Well, Australia only has 25 million people, so we're never going to hit the billion. So what that tells you clearly is we need to have impact around the world, either directly or indirectly. And so while we've never been in a rush to put offices on the ground in other countries, we've certainly done global work, and we will almost certainly do more global work in future, because it's the only way that we're going to get to that 1 billion. So again, like all of these exciting things, it's a mystery that we continue to solve, but that's the big goal for us.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's really good to have these kind of goals, which gives you a sense of direction, a sense of purpose. And, it's not something that's easily achievable, which is great, because you continuously have to strive and work towards it. Well, you've talked...
I was also just going to say, and it's part of the lexicon in the firm as well. Just yesterday, we won a new project, and I saw someone saying, "Oh, that'll be such a good 1 million, 1 billion project." That is the way they were conceptualizing it. They didn't describe it in terms of its glamour or its dollar value. They described it as an exciting win because of the impact it could have directly and indirectly on human potential, because it's a large leadership program focused on an education organization. So thinking of all of the beneficiaries of the education that organization provides immediately got us thinking in that way. So it takes you to a more profound and meaningful place.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very good example. So we've talked a lot about, helping people to realize their full potential, helping leaders to develop their potential, etc. How would you describe this process, and how do you know when someone's arrived at this destination of achieving their potential? Because it seems a bit vague and difficult to quantify.
It is. And look, you never realize your full potential. I think that's part of the magic of it. One of the things that always attracted me to psychology was the fact that this was not an algebraic formula that you could solve.
Yes.
That in a sense, there was no end that you could find. And that's certainly the case here as well. I think you can find some people around the world that you'd say, well, you've achieved a pretty damn high percentage of your potential that are pretty impressive. But there may be an asymptote that we can just never quite reach, but it doesn't matter. I mean, we shouldn't strive for it. So look, we measure that in a variety of ways. We can measure it in terms of uplift in particular capabilities. We can measure it in terms of business impact. We can measure it in terms of the feedback from their direct reports, peers, and manager. So there's a variety of sources. But when it gets into quite deep things like mindset, you're right, we can only measure it to a certain degree. So this is less about a number to hit and more about a philosophy to live by.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. A couple of other things I just wanted to ask about your own background. I know you've had a very long and successful career, but this combination of maths and psychology that we just touched on, how has that helped you in your career? Because two are obviously as different or as distinct as could be.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's either been a blessing or a curse or both. I recall, so I graduated from university at a time of a significant economic downturn. There weren't many jobs around. But I saw this one that said, we're looking for people with backgrounds in either mathematics, psychology, economics, anthropology, philosophy, and I'd done them all. And so I told them I was the person for the role, and fortunately got it. And I remember being at university because I was doing my maths and psychology degrees concurrently. And, I would be in a maths room with people who had incredible mathematical ability, but really struggled with, interpersonal interaction and understanding the psychology of people. And then I'd go to psychology lectures and have people around me with great insight into humanity, but, really struggled with anything that involved an equation. And what I'd like to think is, here's the positive side, is that it's given me an appreciation for both sides of the brain. whether you believe or not in that kind of hemispheric view of the brain, the concept is still a good one. That, there is this part of us that's very structured and analytical, and there's this other side of us that's very creative and interpersonal. And rather than just focusing on one or the other, I think there's real power in bringing the two together. I think of Leonardo da Vinci, who had the incredible engineering ability and so on, but also the creativity to imagine something like a helicopter. Yes. Or, someone like Einstein, who, understood non-Euclidean geometry, but also had the creativity just to ask himself, but what if gravity was not a force, but a manifestation of warping of the space-time continuum? Those are just, by the way, just to be clear, I'm not comparing myself with either of those things, but you see what I mean in terms of the two coming together. But I'll tell you, so there's an old fable of the fox and the hedgehog that you may well know, where the fox is smart because he knows many things. He's got all these cunning ruses for how he's going to catch the hedgehog. And the hedgehog only knows one thing, how to roll up into a ball. But it's a very skill, and he does it very well. And the question becomes, which is better, the fox or the hedgehog? And who knows? There's some evidence that shows, well, if you really want to excel at something, well, then really be a hedgehog. Find that one thing, tennis or chess or whatever it might be, and take it to the limit. But that's not me. I'll forever be a fox, and I guess I'll have the good and the bad of that orientation.
So as we get to the end of our conversation, one of the things I like to ask guests such as yourself is, what advice would you give to the younger generation who may be starting their careers, maybe in the early stages of their careers, especially in a country like developing country like Pakistan, or some of our viewers are in places like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and so on. What sort of advice would you give them, which will hopefully help them achieve success?
Well, I would tell them to believe in themselves, first of all. All success involves some degree of risk. Now, I don't want to suggest to anyone that they should take an imprudent level of risk. You should obviously manage. You should know that if things went wrong, that you can still get by and survive. Yes. But it is important to believe in yourself and be willing to take some chances. Those chances, those risks, are really the premium, the basis for the premium of taking them. For a long time, I never thought I would set up my own business. I'd seen my father and my brother take entrepreneurial careers and be continually stressed. And I thought, if there's one thing I will never do, it's set up my own business. and it only happened because of this, unusual time in my life, and the fact that my co-founder and I thought we would give it a go at a time where there was not too much to lose. But I was pretty sure that I wouldn't be as successful running my own business as being inside a larger consultancy.
Right.
And I was dead wrong. And for too long, I hadn't believed in myself enough, and I hadn't taken those reasonable chances. So again, I'm not suggesting to anyone to be imprudent. That's not my message. My message is to believe in yourself. And while you need to look after the short term so you don't lose your shirt, overall, keep your eye on the long term.
That's great advice, Anthony. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you, and thank you so much for your time and the advice, especially in the last part that you shared with the younger generation. And wish you more success with your company and with in your own life. And may you continue to succeed and prosper. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your very adept interviewing. It was most impressive.
Thank you. See you soon, Anthony. Take care. Bye.
Bye.